We are going to start a new series today called The Comeback. And as Ray already mentioned, this is based on a book that I read not too long ago by Louis Giglio titled The Comeback. And it's just one of those books where, I read a lot. I don't read nearly as much as Ray does. But when I do read certain books and I just feel the Spirit say, man, this is not just for you. This is for the whole church. And this is one of those times where I just felt like this needs to be spoken. They need to hear what this author has written about just comebacks in the Word of God. And so for the next 5 weeks, we're going to be looking at comebacks. How many of y'all just love a good comeback story? Right? Don't we they just resonate with us. We love them. A good movie like Rocky. How many Rocky fans? The franchise kind of went downhill, but just the comeback story of Rocky. How about an impossible recovery from terminal illness or an injury? I was remembering Bethany Hamilton. Do y'all remember her story? Back in 2003, she was a surfer. And I think she was in Maui, and she was attacked by a great white shark, and it actually bit her arm off. And she comes back from that injury, and she continues to be a professional surfer. And they actually make a movie about her story called Soul Surfer. If you've never seen that movie, watch it. It's wonderful. It's great. It's a comeback story from an injury. How about an amazing sports comeback like Simone Biles in the Olympics this summer? Or maybe my favorite, Michael Jordan taking 13 months off from the NBA to go play minor league baseball, AA baseball, and then he comes back and he leads the Chicago Bulls to a second three-peat. Like, that's just the most amazing thing I've ever heard in my life. Possibly rivaled by the Boston Red Sox. I know there might not be Boston Red Sox fans here today, but how about the Boston Red Sox in the 2004 ALCS? They're down 3-0. They're playing against their hated rivals, the New York Yankees. They come back and win 4 straight games to win the ALCS. But not only that, they go to the World Series, they sweep the Cardinals, they break the curse of the Bambino, and an 86-year drought, and they win the World Series. If you've never seen that 30 for 30 on ESPN, that's another one y'all got to watch. You need to watch Soul Surfer, you need to watch the Boston Red Sox in 2004. We just love comeback stories. Or how about now this football season, that last drive, that final drive, the 2-minute drill, they come down, come back from behind, score that game-winning touchdown, especially when it's the Dallas Cowboys, right? Any Cowboys fans out there? Yeah? All right. We've got hope again this year. We're going to see what happens. But I actually learned this week that Roger Staubach was nicknamed Captain Comeback. Right? I was too young to know that about Roger. I was just a baby when Roger Staubach was quarterback for the Cowboys. But they called him Captain Comeback. So I read between 1969 and 1979, he played 11 seasons for the Cowboys. He led them to 23 game-winning drives, 15 comebacks during the fourth quarter, with 17 of those game-winning drives in the final 2 minutes or in overtime. So, hey, Staubach, Captain Comeback. Everybody loves just a comeback story. They strike a chord with us, don't they? They make us realize that anything is possible, that it's not over till it's over, right? There's still hope. There's still a possibility. If you think about it, the classic comeback story contains one of two twists. It's either about an underdog who falters and then succeeds beyond their wildest dreams, or it's about a champion who is on the top, but then he falls and he fights hard to come back and he makes a big return. Either way, there's a reversal of fortunes, isn't there? Somebody was up against a great obstacle and now has overcome. We love these stories, again, just because they give us hope. They give us hope. I think we can all relate to the experience of spending time in difficult places, circumstances where we wondered if we were ever going to make it back, right? I think we've all been there. We all know what it feels like to have life disappoint us and not really work out the way that we had hoped. We've all been in seasons when we've longed for something better than what we're experiencing right now. And maybe you're there today. Maybe you just feel like you're in a hopeless situation in your own life, and you're longing for a fresh start, for a change of heart, a new beginning, a powerful spiritual turnaround in your life. What kind of challenge are you facing today? Just think about that. Let maybe the Spirit just kind of point that out. What's really going on in your heart and mind? Maybe you're facing a conflict with your friends or your coworkers or some of your relatives, and relationships are strained and you don't know what to do. You need to come back in your relationships, renewed relationships. Maybe you're struggling to overcome an addiction or some sort of sin in your life. You need to come back from despair and darkness to victory and strength and confidence again. Perhaps you're overwhelmed at work, or you hate your job, or you can't find a job, or you feel stuck in a dead-end job, and it seems like there's no way forward. You need a fresh perspective, a new direction. Or maybe you're going through a rough season academically. If you wonder you're ever going to pass this course or graduate, you need a big dose of hope, an infusion of fresh strength. Or maybe it's your closest relationship, your marriage. Maybe your marriage is on the rocks and you wonder if you're going to make it through. You need to rekindle the love that you once felt for each other. Maybe you're here today and you're grieving deeply because of a great loss. You're in the midst of tragedy. There are no words to even describe what you're going through. You find it difficult to even find your next breath. You just hurt. You need help taking that next breath. You need perspective in your pain. Maybe the problem is a serious and deep disappointment. You know, life just hasn't turned out for you the way that you hoped it would. I had all these hopes and dreams and plans for my life, and those dreams just haven't come to pass. You're disillusioned, directionless. You want to know which way to go. I don't even know what to do, where to even start at this point in my life. Whatever you're facing today, I hope that we can see that the need for a comeback is really universal, isn't it? Don't we all come to these places in our lives where we need God just to show up? I think this concept of a comeback resonates with us because at some point in life, all of us face challenges, losses, and failures that just seem insurmountable. They can lead to moments of despair and hopelessness. But what we're going to learn in these series is that these dark times are not the end. They're not the end. They don't define us. They're actually opportunities for a powerful resurgence in our life. Opportunities for finding hope and developing character and perseverance and finding a deeper faith. So if you are feeling hopeless today, I've got good news for you. Our story isn't over as long as Jesus is in it. Okay? Your story is not over as long as Jesus is in it. If you think about it, the entire story of humanity, all the way back to the Garden of Eden, is the story of people who have stumbled and fallen, right? I mean, all the way from the start. We've just messed it up. We've messed up royally. Yet somehow in the ocean of God's grace and mercy, He provides a comeback for anyone who will put their faith and hope in Him. Lane Kiffin, who is coach at Ole Miss, I read a quote from him this week. He said, "I don't know if God is a sports fan or not, but I do know this. He loves a good comeback." Right? We just see it over and over again, don't we, in the Bible, in the Word of God. We see it in Moses, in Moses' life, in his anger issues. We see it in Samson, in his life, with even his lust issues. We see it in Jonah's life, even as he's running away from God. We see it in Ruth and Naomi's loss. We see it in David's adultery. We see it in Peter's denial. We see it in Zacchaeus' stealing. We see it in the prodigal son rejecting the father and doing his own thing. We see it in Saul's persecution of believers. We see it in Lazarus in the grave. After 4 days in the grave, we see it in the thief on the cross with his dying breath. The truth is, we're all sinners. Everybody needs a comeback. And if we seek God, that's what he offers us. Through Jesus, no matter what our obstacles are, no matter what mistakes we've made, no matter if we're in a season of wandering or darkness, God's purpose and plans will still prevail. We can have confidence that our story is not over as long as Jesus is in it. I love the tagline for Giglio's book. He says, it's never too late, you're not too far gone, you're not too old, and you're not too far away. Chances are for some of you here today, as I already mentioned, maybe you once had a dream for your life. You had plans for your life, your family, your career that you could envision coming true, and that dream was snatched away. Everything fell apart, and the dream that you felt like was from God collapsed maybe in a moment or over a series of events that you didn't see coming, and you're and now what? Now what? What do you do then? Genesis, in the book of Genesis, chapters 37 through 50, we find the story of a young man named Joseph who had a dream from God. Right? Y'all remember what happened to Joseph, right? He's a young man, and he receives this dream from God. Now, he makes the mistake of telling his brothers what? Hey, guess what? I got a dream. And you guys are going to bow down to me one day. And do you think his brothers really appreciated that? Him saying, no, they really didn't. And besides the fact that he is his father's favorite, and his father makes it known that he's the favorite by gifting him this beautiful coat of many colors. So every time his brothers see him in this beautiful coat, their anger, their hate just begins to boil over for Joseph. One day they're tending their father's sheep, and they decide, you know what, let's just get rid of this guy. We've had enough of him. So Joseph is thrown into a pit. He is sold into slavery at the age of 17. How many 17-year-olds do we have here today? Anybody 17? Steve Bass is 17. I see Ravi is 17. Matthias, I was looking for Matthias. Is he here? Isaac's here. Are you 17? This is a 17-year-old young man. Okay, imagine you are sold by your brothers into slavery at the young age of 17. Right? And he's carried off to this foreign land, this godless country. And he is falsely accused, and he is thrown into prison, and he is betrayed and forgotten. How do we relate to a guy like Joseph? And if we think about it, our story is a lot closer to his than we might think. Have you ever been stabbed in the back? Right? Have you ever been sold out, abandoned, left behind? Everyone else is getting ahead and you're falling farther behind. Have you suffered unjustly at the hands of others? Somebody undercut you or told lies about you. Or maybe you've never been thrown into a pit, but that's sure how it felt. Maybe you had just gotten things going in the right direction, then your life took a sudden downward spiral. It's amazing that Joseph went through all of this, everything that we just described, and yet he still had the perspective that God was at work the whole time. He never lost sight of God's work in his life. How did he do that? How's that even possible? How did Joseph stay hopeful through everything that he went through? Giglio shares 5 principles in his book from Joseph's experience. We're going to look at those this morning. 5 perspectives to help us when life feels hopeless, when it feels like we've been forgotten by others and even by God himself. Let's look at the first one, the first perspective. Your story is part of God's story. Your story is a part of God's story. Joseph understood that the overall purpose of his life was to fit into a small part of God's larger plan for the world. Let that kind of sink in. His life, your life, my life fits in a small way into God's larger plan for the whole world. Now, have you ever thought of your life that way? Do you think of your life that way, or do you wait a minute now. This is my life, and I've kind of just invited God along to maybe, help me out when I need him, or just to bless me, or, if I'm sick or something, I might shoot up a quick prayer to help me get well so I can keep kind of going on with my stuff and my plans and my life. Do we see the difference there? Joseph understood that his life's purpose was bigger than simply playing out his own dream. He knew he was on earth to be a part of God's story. Maybe your dream is to get a degree or accomplish a certain task, or to find a spouse, or start a business, or move to a certain place. And those may be great dreams, but there's a bigger dream that overrides everything else. It's that your life counts for the glory of God. That's the purpose of your life. He's got plans and purposes for your good and for his glory. If we don't embrace that dream, then we're in trouble. You know why? Because all of our smaller dreams are subject to change, aren't they? If we've lived long enough, we realize that that's the truth, right? A sickness or an illness, or a car wreck, or a financial downturn that just comes out of nowhere and we're sideswiped. But you might say, well, wait a minute though, Joseph had a dream from God. His dream was from God. Why is all this bad stuff happening to him? Why is he having to sit in jail as an innocent man for 2 years? The cupbearer gets out, says, hey man, I got your back, I'm going to remember you. And as soon as he gets out, what does he do? He completely forgets about Joseph. Despite trusting God, Joseph is still going through it, isn't he? He feels the pain and the loneliness. How do you, in those kind of circumstances, how do you hold on to your faith and your belief? But the story doesn't end here, does it? We remember what happened to Joseph. Pharaoh has a dream, and his fellow inmate who had forgotten about him, the cupbearer, remembers, oh, wait a minute. I do remember this guy, right? There was a guy. What was his name? He was down at the jail. He was good with dreams. Sir, if you need help with your dream, I know a prisoner who can help. So Joseph is brought before Pharaoh, interprets the dream, gives all the credit to God. He says, Egypt is going to have 7 amazing years of harvest. There's going to be bumper crops, followed by 7 years of the worst famine that you've ever seen. Now, Pharaoh is so impressed by Joseph that he actually puts him in charge of preparing for this coming famine. In one day, Joseph goes from prisoner to second in command of all of Egypt. Actually, it wasn't really one day. It was really 13 years of God working behind the scenes, in the circumstances, ruling and overruling and guiding and moving to bring Joseph right here to where he's standing as second in command over all of Egypt. But you might think, well, but look at all that he had to go through to get there for 13 years. For 13 years. 7 years later, sure enough, the famine comes, and it not only affects Egypt, but all the surrounding nations, including Canaan, where Joseph's family and his brothers still there tending sheep. Crops are failing, animals are dying, the family's facing starvation. They hear the rumor that there's food in Egypt, so their father sends them down to buy grain. And guess who they meet in Egypt? Guess who the brothers meet when they get there? They didn't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognized them. But more importantly, Joseph also recognized the plan of God unfolding in front of his very eyes. There are his brothers kneeling there before him. Oh, please, can we buy grain from you? We don't have time for the whole story, but Joseph eventually reveals to them who he was. He is reunited with his father Jacob. Imagine this comeback for Jacob, his father, who thinks he's been dead all this time. And now he has this reunion with his son. All the family moves to Egypt where they're safe and provided for. But when Jacob dies, when the family patriarch passes away, all of a sudden these brothers begin to panic. Let's listen to Genesis 50 verses 15 through 18. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs that we did to him?" So they sent word to Joseph saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died." And my question was on Friday, did he really? Or did they're just kind of trying to cover their butts at this point, all right? Dad said this, all right? We promise. Dad said this. Verse 17, this is what you were to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now, please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father. When their message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and they threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. Now, Joseph, if he was anything like me, could have thought, how interesting. You know, I seem to remember a dream where you guys all bowed down to me. Oh, what's this? You're bowing down to me now, begging for mercy? I guess I was right after all. And now I'm going to stick it to you guys. Right? You're going to get what you deserve. But Joseph didn't do that at all. He focused on a higher story. When they said, "We're your slaves," Joseph didn't answer, "You're darn right you're my slaves." Listen to what he says in verse 19. But Joseph replied, "Don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so that I could save the lives of many people. No, don't be afraid. I will continue to take care of you and your children." So he reassured them by speaking kindly to them. Now, what y'all need to know is Joseph is the Jesus figure in the Old Testament, all right? And what we see in these verses, isn't this Jesus? This is a Jesus kind of response in Joseph. This is amazing. Joseph asked his brothers if they're seeing what he's seeing, that this was all a part of God's bigger story Can y'all see this with me? What you intended for evil, God intended for good. Joseph is saying that God is sovereign over all of the affairs of the world, ruling and overruling. Even when it looks like things are out of control, he's still on the throne. Brothers are not in charge. Circumstances are not in charge. God is in charge, and Joseph never lost sight of that. Even through the difficulties and the hardships and the fear and the loneliness, he never lost sight of that. He never lost sight of God's love and purpose. He knew that God was using his life to bring glory to himself and salvation to many people. Don't miss this. This is a powerful way to live. A powerful way to live. When bad things happen, what does the enemy do? He comes and he tells us, God doesn't love you anymore. He doesn't have any plans for you. Some of us even buy into the lie and we walk away from God. We bail on God, but Joseph tells us, don't abandon God. Don't do it. Because even in the pit, even in the prison cell, God has a plan. And he's working. Through the lens of God's grace, we can look back on those 13 seemingly lost years of Joseph's life and see that they were meant for salvation. Not only for Joseph, but for his entire family and so many others. The entire country of Egypt. If we can grasp that God is always in control, no matter what our circumstances, we can be released to trust our lives into the hands of a loving God. And that's victory. We don't have to try to manipulate the situation or try to control the situation or give up on God. All we can really do is say, God, I trust you. It's as simple as that. I trust you. I trust that my life is fitting into your larger plan for the world. And that's faith. And faith is what pleases God, right? And faith is rewarded by God. That's what he's seeking from his children. I trust you. Here's the second perspective. God goes the distance with you. See, we got to remember that God was with Joseph the whole way. He was with Joseph the whole way, and he's going to be with you the whole way as well. When we're going through trials and difficulties, the enemy, again, he comes with the same speech. If God really loved you, he'd do something different for you. Your circumstances would be different. If God really loved you, your circumstances would be different. Your circumstances would be better right now. Don't believe the lie. Don't fall for the lie. God always loves you. God is always there for you and with you. God always has a plan for you. Even in situations like Joseph's. He's with you in the pit. He's with you when you're sold out. He's with you when you're facing temptation. He's with you in that jail cell. He's with you when the cupbearer or whoever it is forgets about you. He's with you in the years of plenty, and he's with you in the hard, lean years of drought. He's always with you. Hebrews 13:5 reminds us, I will never fail you. I will never abandon you. I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. You're my child. You got to trust me. You got to trust me with your life that I'm working it all together for your good. He's going to go the distance with you. The third perspective to adopt from Joseph's story is that we really need to offer our best for the master. Aren't we tempted when we are just, feeling like we've been shortchanged? Aren't we tempted to say, you know what? I was stabbed in the back. I'm stuck in this situation. It should have been better for me. So, man, I'm just going to go through the motions. Joseph could have done that. He could have cut corners at every turn as a slave in Potiphar's house, unfairly in prison. I'll show them. I'll do the least I can possibly do to get by. They don't deserve anything from me. Who's going to care? I'm entitled to coast. Because of the circumstances of my life, I'm entitled just to coast. But Joseph knew that that's not God's way. That's not God's way. The truth we've seen is that God is with you even when you're overlooked and treated unfairly. He's still right there with you. So if He's with you, then we want to always offer our best to the Master. There's still a plan unfolding. And somebody, I'm telling you, somebody has their eyes on you to see how you're going to respond in those circumstances. My parents were recently here in town, and my dad told me he had run into a friend of mine from high school, just kind of an acquaintance. I didn't really know this girl that well, but she was telling my dad how she used to observe me at school, how I would act and respond, and the things that I had no idea. I had no idea. How many people in your life are watching you? They're watching your words. They're watching your reactions, your responses. How are you going to respond in these circumstances, in this situation? I love what Giglio said. He said, actually, it's probably true that more people have eyes on you in the pit than when you're in a multicolored coat. Right? When things are going well and, whatever. But when you're in the pit, when you're in adversity, those are when the eyes are really on you. You remember Paul and Silas in prison? Right? Shackled in darkness at midnight. And what's their response? You know what? Let's just break out and worship. Let's just worship the Father. Let's just sing together, and all of a sudden an earthquake comes and the chains are broken and they are free, and the jailer's freaking out. Oh my goodness, the prisoners have escaped. They're going to have my head. And Paul's like, it's okay. We're right here. And it results in salvation. This horrible situation that Paul and Silas in, their response of praise and worship in this situation is such a witness. Them not running and abandoning this man, knowing that it's going to cost him his life, results in salvation for this jailer and his entire family. And you ask Paul and Silas, was it worth it? Was the beating worth it? Were the chains worth it? And Paul's going to say, yes. Yes. Because my life and my ministry is not about me. It's a part of God's bigger salvation story. And if what I'm going through can bring hope and healing and salvation to anyone else, it's worth it. So I'm going to do my best. No matter what my circumstances, I'm going to continue to serve my master. 1 Corinthians 10:31 reminds us, whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Whatever you do. Colossians 3:17, again, whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus. I love how the NLT continues, as a representative of the Lord Jesus Christ. That's how we live our lives, as a representative of the Lord Jesus Christ. Are you currently in a bad situation? Do your best. Give it your all for the glory of God. Here's number 4, the fourth perspective. Comeback isn't about payback. But I want payback, right? I want payback. This perspective from Joseph teaches us to be gracious when the tide turns because we're in the plan of God and not in the plan of men. Right, again, let's be honest again. Part of the appeal of Joseph's comeback story is we would like to be in the position to get back at the brothers and really get back at them, right? I mean, it was all their fault. It's their fault. All those years, they're the ones. They threw me in the pit. They sold me into slavery. All that I've gone through, and I've held a grudge for all these years just waiting for this moment where I could just get you back, to take my revenge, waiting for that chance. But Joseph told his brothers that God was in charge of his life, not them. What a perspective. Even though you did do that to me, God is in charge of my life, not you. Not you. He chose to forgive them and not hold on to that bitterness and animosity because I'm a part of God's story. In all things, I believe God is working together for my good. I can trust that. So when you get your comeback, it's a powerful thing to extend grace. To extend grace. Why would we do that? Why would I do that? Because that's what God did for you. That's what God has done for us. He loved us and gave his life for us even when we didn't deserve it. Ephesians 4:31 and 32 says, get rid of all bitterness and rage and anger and harsh words and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. Instead, replace that with kindness. Be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God through Christ has forgiven you. Well, they don't deserve it. Well, neither did you. So I just do what God has done for me. Are you thinking of taking revenge on somebody, getting back at someone in your life? That's not who you are in Christ Jesus. That's not your new identity in him. Comeback isn't about payback. Finally today, number 5, the 5th perspective, it's a salvation story. This whole thing is a salvation story. Your struggle is actually about someone else's deliverance. We already just spoke about this. Let's listen to verses 4 and 5 in Genesis 45. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. And they're like, whoa, wait a minute. No, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I'm your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. Take hold of that phrase, to save lives. Your version might say to preserve life. Joseph understands, again, this is all about God. It's all about God. So this kind of thinking says that my job every day is to put my life into God's hands. And God's job every day is to use my life for his glory. It's as simple as that. I put my life in your hands. I trust you. Even though the circumstances aren't great, I trust that you're working in my life. You're working behind the scenes. You have plans and purposes, and you're going to use my life for your glory. So once again, today, I put my life in your hands. Think about it. Jesus himself was born from the lineage of this family. God was working a really big plan all the way back in the Old Testament to bring us Jesus. And today, he's still working this really big plan, and you and I are a part of that plan. Our lives, we get to be a part of that plan. We stand today in God's grace because of Jesus. And Jesus came through the line of Jacob's family. So thank you, Joseph, for being faithful in the pit, in Potiphar's house, in jail with Pharaoh. Thanks for showing kindness and grace in your comeback. It was God's means for bringing us salvation. Us salvation. This may come as a shock to some of us, but it's not all about me in this life. It's not just all about me. It's all about Jesus becoming known in this broken world. That's it. It's about Jesus. Whatever we're going through, God is always positioning us for someone else's salvation. So as we close today, doesn't Joseph's story remind you of Jesus? I mean, as Jesus hung on the cross, innocent and undeserving, looking down at his crucifiers, he asked God to forgive them. He shows them kindness. The night he was arrested, he was abandoned by those closest to him. He was sold for 30 pieces of silver, stabbed in the back by one of his closest friends, one of his disciples. He suffered and died to bring salvation to the whole world. God sent him ahead of us so that he could bring a great deliverance and a great salvation to many lives. That's you and me. That's you and me. God used Jesus' suffering to bring salvation. He can use our suffering to bring salvation. Joseph teaches us that God can use our struggle. Paul learned this in 2 Corinthians 12:9. He said, he learned this from God. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, says Paul, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. Because I want to be a part of his story. I will boast in my sufferings and my weaknesses because I want to be used, my life, for the glory of God so that his power can be shown through my life. This is a powerful way to live. I don't know what you've lost. I don't know what dreams seem dashed, but I know this: God isn't finished with you yet. He's not finished with your life. Believe that God will still use you in his story for his glory and for the salvation of others. Let me pray for you today.